Do you know someone who always seems to have a secret to tell you? Someone who feels like whatever they have to say is so important, so private, that they have to stand practically right on top of you in order to get the message across? Hello everybody, I'm Joey Mobile, and I don't know about you, but whenever someone approaches me at such a close proximity, and they're just right there in my face, the message is entirely lost. I tune out entirely on what they're saying, and instead, I become self-conscious, and I'm more concerned with things like, is there something hanging out of my nose? Are they checking out maybe a stray hair or a zit that I might have going on? What's my breath smell like? These concepts all relate to something called spatial communication. And what spatial communication is when you're talking about the personal distance, the personal space that you give someone when engaged in conversation. It's been joked about a lot in popular culture. We all remember the Seinfeld episode where Jerry and the gang had the close encounter with a close talker. The Police sang about it in their 1980 smash hit, Don't Stand So Close to Me. But it is a serious matter, and far from a laughing matter if you ever find yourself on the wrong end of it. And believe it or not, it's a concept that goes all the way back to the late 1950s, when a gentleman named Edward T. Hall conducted a study on what would become known as proxemics. And as a conclusion to this study, Mr. Hall found that there were 4 different distances that you should keep when engaged in conversation, hinging on your relationship with the listener. And we can take a look at his results here. And the first distance he talked about was what's known as intimate distance. And intimate distance is exactly what it sounds like. It's an intimate conversation. You really should only be this close to someone if maybe you are intimate with them, if you're about to zero in for a little hanky-panky, or heaven forbid you're even locked in mortal combat of some kind. But intimate distance, it's awfully close. We're talking about from the point of touching to a good 1.5 feet apart. So very close, not acceptable in public, not anything you want to come at anybody with again. Only intimate relationships here, very, very close. You can smell, you can feel the breath coming off of somebody. It's kind of like the conversations you would see in the final act of a chick flick. So, use your better judgment there. Next, we would talk about personal distance. And that's a little ways further off. Personal distance, we're looking at 1.5 feet to about 4 feet. And that's what we call the protective bubble, or the personal space that you often hear people talk about. When engaged in a personal conversation at a personal distance, should the mood strike you, and should the listener concur, of course, you can grab somebody by the shoulders, maybe pull them in for a big hug, maybe just a hand on the shoulder to make them feel better from personal distance. When we look at social distance, that's a distance of 4 to 12 feet, so we're looking at a good difference there from the first two, 4 to 12 feet. And that's typically engaged in social situations. Good examples would be placing an order at the counter at McDonald's. If you go into a bank building, your interaction with the teller. Checking out a book at the library. I work at the library, speaking of. This past week, I was fortunate enough to be able to give a tour to a group of about 80 primary school students, 5-year-olds. And I mean, I've got them 10 rows deep. They're right here, right up at my chest. And I'm looking down at the kid in the front row, and I jokingly ask him, "You're not going to be looking up my nose while I'm giving this speech, I hope, huh?" And he smiled back and he said, "Well, I wasn't before, but maybe I am now." Finally, we take a look at what's called public distance. This is a great deal of distance. We're talking about 12 to 25 feet away. And basically what public distance does, it allows you to keep an eye on everything, mind your surroundings. If you feel like you need to take defensive action, if you're threatened, maybe a sketchy passerby, public distance will give you ample opportunity to channel your inner Chuck Norris should the need arise. So that's a very, just a look at spatial communication and how it can work in your favor. Remember, you don't want to crowd anybody. You get too close, the message is lost. It makes everybody involved uncomfortable. Use your best judgment. You know what type of relationship you're in with the listener more often than not. And keep an appropriate distance. Give everybody an appropriate personal space, and it will make for a better conversational experience all around. I'm Joey Mabio, and thank you for taking this look with me at spatial communication.